The sun that day didn't just shine, it punished. Ethan Cross felt it through his hat, through his shirt, through the leather of his saddle, the kind of heat that made a man's thoughts slow and thick, that turned the Montana horizon into a shimmering lie. He'd been riding since dawn, checking fence lines on the eastern border of his property, and he was ready to be done. Ready for the shade of his porch, the cool of his well water, a few hours of silence before the evening chores pulled him back out. He wasn't expecting to find anyone, especially not her. She was standing at the Dawson gate, old Gerald Dawson's place, 2 miles from Ethan's own land, and she looked like she'd been standing there a while, long enough that the dust had settled on her skirts, long enough that her face had gone pale despite the heat, like the sun had baked all the color out of her and left only bone and stubbornness behind. Ethan slowed his horse. There was a trunk beside her, small, scuffed, the kind a woman might pack her entire life into if she didn't have much life to pack. Her hands were folded in front of her, fingers laced tight, and she wasn't looking at him. Wasn't looking at anything, really, just staring at the dirt like she was trying to will herself into it. He should have kept riding. That's what a smart man would have done. This wasn't his business. Gerald Dawson's business was Gerald Dawson's business. And Ethan had made a practice of keeping his nose out of other people's messes. He had enough of his own. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she stood, too still, like she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. Maybe it was the trunk. Or maybe it was the fact that Gerald's horse wasn't tied anywhere nearby, and the gate was closed, and this woman looked like she'd been left behind. Ethan dismounted. "Ma'am?" She didn't move, didn't even blink. "Ma'am," he said again, louder this time. "You all right?" That got her attention. Her head turned, not quickly, but with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who'd been somewhere else entirely and had to fight her way back. Her eyes met his, and Ethan felt something twist in his chest. She looked wrecked. Not crying, not hysterical, just empty. Like someone had reached inside her and scooped out everything that mattered. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was quiet, clipped, the kind of fine that meant the exact opposite. Ethan glanced at the gate, then back at her. "You waiting for someone?" "No." "You need help?" "No." He scratched the back of his neck, unsure what to do with that. She wasn't giving him much to work with, and he wasn't good at this, talking to people, reading situations, figuring out what the hell was going on when nobody wanted to tell him. But he also wasn't blind. "That your trunk?" "Yes." "You planning to carry it somewhere?" She didn't answer. Ethan sighed. This was getting nowhere. He looked past her toward the Dawson house. It sat a quarter-mile up the road, squat and sun-bleached, with a porch that sagged on one side and a roof that probably leaked when it rained. He'd met Gerald a handful of times, older fellow, kept to himself, didn't say much. Ethan hadn't heard anything about him expecting company. "Gerald Dawson live here?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes." "He inside?" "I assume so." "You assume?" Her jaw tightened. "He didn't invite me in." Ethan frowned. "He didn't—" He stopped, pieced it together. The trunk. The dress she was wearing, nicer than what most women wore out here, but travel-stained and wrinkled. The way she was standing at the gate like she'd been told to stay put and hadn't been told anything since. "You came to see him," Ethan said slowly. "Didn't you?" She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. "And he turned you away." Still nothing. Ethan felt a flicker of anger. He didn't know Gerald well, didn't owe him anything, but leaving a woman out here in this heat without so much as a word? That was low. Lower than low. "How long you been standing here?" he asked. "I don't know." Her voice cracked just slightly. "A while." "A while." "Yes." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her this time. She was younger than he'd first thought, mid-20s maybe. Dark hair pinned up, though pieces of it had come loose and stuck to her neck. Her dress was pale blue, the kind of blue that would have looked nice in a city somewhere, but out here just looked out of place. She had a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so drawn, so tight with whatever she was holding back. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Eliza." "Eliza what?" "Rowan." All right, Miss Rowan. I'm Ethan Cross. I run the ranch a couple miles west of here. He gestured vaguely in the direction he'd come from. Now, I don't know what happened here, and I don't know what Gerald told you, but you can't stay out here. Heat like this'll kill you. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're about 10 minutes from heat stroke. I said I'm fine. Her voice was sharper now, defensive, and Ethan knew he was pushing, but he also knew she wasn't going to ask for help. Women like her, proud women, stubborn women, they'd rather collapse in the dirt than admit they needed something. He'd met women like that before. Hell, he'd been a person like that before. Look, he said, keeping his voice level, I don't know what your plan is, but standing at this gate isn't one. You got family around here? Friends? No. Money for a room in town? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Ethan exhaled through his nose. This was a bad idea. He knew it was a bad idea. Getting involved in other people's problems never ended well, and this woman, Eliza Rowan, was clearly neck-deep in a problem he didn't understand. But he couldn't just leave her here. All right, he said. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on my horse, I'm going to tie your trunk to the saddle, and I'm going to take you back to my place. You can rest, get some water, figure out what you want to do next. No strings, no expectations, just shelter, until you get your feet under you. She stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. Why? Why what? Why would you do that? Ethan shrugged. Because it's the right thing to do. You don't know me. No, I don't. I could be. Anyone could be. But you're not. You're a woman who got left at a gate in the middle of nowhere, and I'm not the kind of man who rides past that. Eliza's eyes searched his face, looking for the catch, the angle, the thing he wasn't saying. Ethan had seen that look before. Distrust so deep it had roots. He didn't blame her for it. I don't need charity, she said finally. Didn't say you did. I can take care of myself. Didn't say you couldn't. Then why? Because nobody should have to take care of themselves alone. He picked up her trunk, felt the weight of it, heavier than it looked. Now, are you coming, or are you planning to argue with me until the sun sets? She didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, staring at him like she was trying to decide if he was real or just another lie the world had handed her. Then, slowly, she nodded. Chumps. The ride back to Ethan's ranch was silent. Eliza sat in front of him on the horse, stiff as a board, her hands gripping the saddle horn like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Ethan kept his distance, kept his hands on the reins and his eyes on the trail, but he could feel the tension radiating off her in waves. She didn't trust him. He didn't blame her. The ranch came into view as the sun started its slow descent toward the horizon. It wasn't much, a small house, a barn, a corral, a few outbuildings scattered across the property like dice someone had tossed and forgotten. The land stretched out in every direction, flat and endless, broken only by the occasional rise of a hill or the dark line of a fence. It was isolated. It was quiet. It was exactly the way Ethan liked it. He helped Eliza down from the horse, and she stood in the yard looking around like she'd just landed on the moon. It's not fancy, Ethan said, tying the horse to the post, but it's solid. House is small. 1 bedroom, which you'll take. I'll sleep in the barn. You don't have to. I do, and I will. No arguments. He grabbed her trunk and carried it toward the house. Eliza followed, her steps hesitant, like she wasn't sure this was real, like she was waiting for the moment it all fell apart. Inside, the house was exactly what it looked like from the outside, plain, functional, a little rough around the edges. A main room with a table, a couple of chairs, a stove in the corner, a door leading to the bedroom, a window with no curtains. Everything clean, but nothing decorative, nothing soft. Ethan set the trunk down by the bedroom door. Water's in the pump out back, he said. There's bread and some dried meat in the cupboard if you're hungry. I've got chores to finish, so I'll be outside for a while. You need anything? Just holler. Eliza stood in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, looking lost. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Why not? Ethan paused in the doorway, looked back at her. Because you don't know what you've signed up for. Out here, Miss Rowan, life doesn't go easy, and neither do I. That first night, Eliza didn't sleep. She lay in Ethan's bed, his bed, which felt wrong in a way she couldn't quite name, and stared at the ceiling. The mattress was thin, the blanket rough, but it was more than she'd expected, more than she deserved, probably. She kept waiting for the knock on the door, the moment when Ethan Cross would show his real intentions, when the kindness would peel away and reveal something uglier underneath. She'd learned that lesson already. Men didn't help women for free. There was always a price. But the knock didn't come. Instead, she heard him outside, boots on the porch, the creak of the barn door, the low murmur of his voice as he talked to his horse. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. She thought about Gerald Dawson, about the way he'd looked at her when she'd stepped off the wagon, like she was a piece of merchandise that didn't match the description. She'd seen the disgust in his eyes before he'd even said a word, seen the way his mouth had twisted, the way he'd turned his back. "You're not what I expected," he'd said. That was all. No explanation, no apology, just those 5 words, and then he'd walked away, left her standing there with her trunk and her shame and nowhere to go. She'd thought about running, about walking into town, finding work, starting over, but she had no money, no references, no connections. And the way the wagon driver had looked at her when he'd driven off, like she was already a ghost, told her everything she needed to know about her prospects. So she'd stood at that gate and waited. For what, she didn't know. And then Ethan Cross had ridden past. Eliza closed her eyes, tried to push the thoughts away. She didn't want to think about Gerald, didn't want to think about the journey that had brought her here, the desperation that had made her answer an ad in a newspaper for a man she'd never met. Didn't want to think about how small her life had become, how few choices she had left. But the thoughts came anyway. They always did. When Eliza woke, the sun was already up. She sat up quickly, disoriented, her heart pounding. She'd overslept. She never overslept. She had things to do, work to finish, expectations to meet. Then she remembered. She wasn't in Chicago anymore. Wasn't in the boarding house with its thin walls and thinner patients. Wasn't waiting tables or scrubbing floors or smiling at men who looked at her like she was something they could buy. She was here, wherever here was. Eliza stood, smoothed down her dress, and walked to the window. Outside, the ranch looked different in the daylight. Bigger, somehow, but also smaller. The emptiness of it pressed in from all sides. She saw Ethan by the barn, working on something she couldn't quite make out. His sleeves were rolled up, his hat tipped back, and he moved with the kind of efficiency that came from doing the same tasks 1,000 times. He hadn't come inside, hadn't checked on her, hadn't asked her for anything. Eliza felt something twist in her chest, something uncomfortably close to guilt. She left the bedroom, found the bread and meat Ethan had mentioned, forced herself to eat even though her stomach was still knotted. Then she walked outside. Ethan looked up as she approached, wiped his hands on his pants. "Morning," he said. "Morning. Sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." He nodded, went back to his work. Eliza stood there, unsure what to do with herself. "Is there something I can help with?" she asked. Ethan glanced at her. "You don't have to—" "I know, but I'd like to, if that's all right." He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. There's always work to be done." And just like that, Eliza Rowan's new life began. Tasset. The first week was brutal. Not because Ethan was cruel. He wasn't. Not because the work was impossible. It wasn't, though it came close. But because Eliza had spent her entire life in cities, in boarding houses, in places where survival meant different things. She knew how to scrub a floor, how to mend a shirt, how to stretch a meal. But she didn't know how to live out here in this vast, unforgiving place where the land seemed to go on forever, and the silence was louder than any noise she'd ever heard. Ethan didn't coddle her. He showed her how to pump water, how to feed the chickens, how to muck out the stalls. He taught her which tools were which, how to carry a bucket without spilling, how to move around the horses without spooking them. He didn't explain things twice, didn't slow down, just expected her to keep up. And she did. Barely. Her hands blistered, her back ached. Her legs trembled by the end of each day, and she collapsed into bed each night too tired to think, too exhausted to dream. But she didn't complain. Not once. Ethan noticed. He didn't say anything, he wasn't the type. But she could see it in the way he watched her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, like he was trying to figure her out, like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to find in his yard. "You don't have to prove anything," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, the sun sinking low and red. Eliza looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're working yourself into the ground. You can slow down. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not. I will be if I don't pull my weight." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You already are pulling your weight. More than." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, just there. "Why'd you come out here?" Ethan asked eventually. Eliza stiffened. "That's personal." "Fair enough." "Why'd you help me?" "That's personal too." She almost smiled. Almost. "Touché." Ethan leaned back in his chair, tipped his hat down over his eyes. "Out here, people don't ask too many questions. Past is past. Future's uncertain. All you got is right now. So if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. But if you ever do, I'm not going anywhere." Eliza felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized was holding tight. "Thank you," she said. "Stop thanking me." "Why?" "Because you don't owe me anything, and I don't want you thinking you do." Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, at the hard lines of his face, the rough stubble on his jaw, the way his shoulders carried weight she couldn't see. He wasn't a soft man, wasn't an easy man, but he was a good one. She could see that now. "All right," she said. "No more thank yous." "Good." They sat there until the stars came out, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza felt something close to peace. But peace didn't last long in a place like this. It started small. A comment here, a look there. Ethan had to go into town for supplies, and Eliza went with him. She needed fabric, thread, a few things she couldn't make or find on the ranch. She thought it would be simple. It wasn't. The stares started the moment they arrived, women whispering behind their hands, men watching from across the street. The clerk at the general store barely looked at her, his mouth pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Ethan didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He bought what he needed, paid, and walked out. Eliza followed, her cheeks burning. "They think I'm your mistress," she said when they were back on the wagon. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let them think what they want. It's your reputation." "My reputation's my business, not theirs." "But, Eliza." He looked at her, his eyes hard. "I don't give a damn what those people think, and neither should you." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his certainty wash over her doubt. But it wasn't that simple. Out here, reputation mattered. It was currency, and she was spending his without permission. That night, Ethan found her sitting outside, staring at the horizon. "You're thinking too much," he said. "I'm thinking the right amount." "No. You're thinking about what other people think. That's always too much." Eliza turned to him. "Don't you care?" "About what?" "About what they're saying, about us." Ethan shrugged. "I care about a lot of things. That's not one of them." "Why not?" "Because I've spent too much of my life worrying about things I can't control, and I'm done with that." Eliza studied him. "What happened to you?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Same thing that happened to you, I expect. Life." And that was all he gave her, but it was enough. The weeks blurred together. Eliza learned. She adapted. She grew stronger, not just in body, but in something else, something harder to name. The ranch became familiar. The rhythms of the work became routine. And Ethan became something she hadn't expected, a constant. They didn't talk much, didn't need to, but there was an understanding between them now, a respect that hadn't been there before. He trusted her to handle things. She trusted him not to ask for more than she could give. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. One morning, she found him fixing a broken section of fence, and she grabbed a hammer without being asked. "You don't have to," he said. "I know." They worked side by side, the sun climbing higher, the sweat dripping down their backs. When they finished, Ethan stepped back, surveyed their work. "Not bad," he said. "Not bad?" Eliza raised an eyebrow. "It's perfect." Ethan almost smiled. Almost. "Don't get cocky." "I'm not cocky. I'm confident. There's a difference." "If you say so." Eliza laughed, actually laughed, and the sound startled both of them. Ethan looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, you should do that more often." "Do what?" "Laugh." Eliza felt her cheeks warm. "Maybe I will." And for a moment, standing there in the sun with dirt on her hands and hope in her chest, she actually believed it. But hope, she'd learned, was a dangerous thing. Especially out here. Especially for people like them. And the world, it turned out, wasn't done with either of them yet. The trouble started on a Tuesday. Ethan had gone into town alone. Eliza had insisted on staying back to finish mending a section of the chicken coop that had come loose in the wind. She'd gotten good at that kind of work, fast and efficient, her hands no longer soft, but capable. She was hammering the last board into place when she heard the horses, 3 of them, coming up the road at a leisurely pace. She straightened, wiped her hands on her apron, and squinted into the afternoon sun. The riders were still too far away to make out clearly, but something about the way they moved, unhurried, deliberate, made her stomach tighten. By the time they reached the yard, she'd put down the hammer and was standing in front of the house, arms crossed, trying to look like she belonged there. The lead rider was a woman, middle-aged, sharp-eyed, dressed in dark fabric that looked expensive even under a layer of trail dust. The 2 men flanking her were younger, harder, the kind who wore their authority like a weapon. The woman dismounted with practiced ease, handed her reins to one of the men, and looked Eliza up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "You must be the girl," she said. Eliza's jaw tightened. "I'm Eliza Rowan, Mrs. Judith Carmichael." The woman didn't offer her hand. "I own the boarding house in town, and the dry goods store, and a fair amount of the land around here. Congratulations." Mrs. Carmichael's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I hear you've been living here with Mr. Cross." "That's right." "Alone?" "Yes." "How long?" Eliza hesitated. "A few weeks." "A few weeks." Mrs. Carmichael repeated the words like they tasted bad. "And in that time, has Mr. Cross made his intentions clear?" "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." The woman took a step closer. "Mr. Cross is a respected man in this community. Keeps to himself, doesn't cause trouble, pays his debts. But bringing a woman of questionable background into his home, unchaperoned, without any formal arrangement, well, that raises questions." Eliza felt heat crawl up her neck. "My background is none of your business. It is when it affects the reputation of this town. We have standards here, Miss Rowan. Decency, morality. We can't have women like you." "Women like me?" Eliza's voice came out sharper than she intended. "You don't know anything about me. I know you were rejected by Gerald Dawson. I know you had nowhere else to go. I know Mr. Cross took you in out of pity, and now you're living under his roof like—" She trailed off, let the implication hang in the air. Eliza's hands curled into fists. "Mr. Cross has been nothing but respectful. He gave me shelter when I needed it, that's all." "Is it?" Mrs. Carmichael's eyebrow arched. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you found yourself a convenient arrangement. Room and board in exchange for services." The word landed like a slap. Eliza took a breath, forced herself to stay calm. "You should leave." "I'll leave when I'm ready. This is still a free country, last I checked." "This is private property, and you're a guest on it, not the owner, not the mistress. Just a girl who showed up with nothing and latched onto the first man who'd have her." Eliza felt something crack inside her. All the shame, All the humiliation she'd swallowed since Gerald Dawson had turned her away. It rose up like bile, hot and acidic. "Get off this land," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Now." Mrs. Carmichael blinked, surprised. Then her expression hardened. "You don't give orders here, girl. And if you think Ethan Cross is going to protect you from the consequences of your choices, you're more foolish than I thought. This town doesn't forget. And it doesn't forgive." She turned, climbed back onto her horse with the help of one of her men, and looked down at Eliza one last time. "You'd be wise to move on before you ruin him completely." Then they rode off, leaving Eliza standing in the dust, shaking with anger she couldn't release. When Ethan came home that evening, he found her sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. "What happened?" he asked, dismounting. "Nothing." "Eliza." She looked up at him, and he saw it in her eyes, something raw and wounded. "Mrs. Carmichael came by," she said quietly, "with two of her men." Ethan's expression darkened. "What did she want?" "To tell me I'm ruining your reputation. To tell me I should leave before I drag you down with me." "She said that?" "More or less." Ethan was silent for a moment, his jaw working. Then he sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You planning to listen to her?" he asked. Eliza let out a bitter laugh. "I don't know. Maybe she's right." "She's not." "How do you know?" "Because I know Judith Carmichael. She's the kind of woman who thinks she runs this town because she owns half of it. But she doesn't run me. Never has. Never will." Eliza shook her head. "It's not just her, Ethan. It's everyone. They look at me like I'm something dirty, something shameful. Let them look. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they're whispering about." "They're whispering about both of us, and I don't care." "Well, I do." Her voice cracked. "I care because I've spent my whole life being looked at like that. Like I'm less than. Like I don't matter. And I thought maybe out here things would be different, but they're not. They're exactly the same." Ethan turned to her, his eyes intense. "You matter to me." Eliza froze. "You work harder than anyone I've ever met," he continued. "You don't complain, you don't quit. You show up every day and you do what needs to be done, and you do it well. So I don't care what Judith Carmichael thinks. I don't care what anyone in that town thinks. You've earned your place here. And if they can't see that, that's their problem, not yours." Eliza felt something tighten in her throat. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Standing up for me. Defending me. You don't owe me anything." Ethan looked away, out at the darkening horizon. "Maybe not, but you don't deserve to be treated like that. Nobody does." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken things settling between them. Finally, Eliza said, "I don't want to cause you trouble." "You're not." "I am. You know I am." "Then it's trouble I can handle." Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Certainty. Resolve. Like he'd already made his decision and wasn't interested in reconsidering. "You're stubborn," she said. "So are you." "That's different." "How?" "Because I have to be. You choose to be." Ethan almost smiled. "Maybe. But the result's the same." Eliza shook her head, but she felt something ease in her chest. Not relief exactly, but something close. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I thought we agreed. No more thank yous." "This one doesn't count." "Why not?" "Because I mean it." Ethan looked at her, and for a moment, something passed between them, something neither of them was ready to name. Then he stood, brushed the dust off his pants, and held out his hand. "Come on, let's get some dinner. I'm starving." Eliza took his hand, let him pull her to her feet, and followed him inside. But as she crossed the threshold, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That whatever fragile peace they'd built here was already starting to crack. And she was right. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Ethan went about his work, and Eliza went about hers. And neither of them mentioned Mrs. Carmichael or the town or the whispers that were undoubtedly spreading like wildfire. But the tension was there, hovering just beneath the surface. Eliza caught herself watching Ethan more than she should, noticing things she hadn't before. The way he moved, the way he talked to the horses, the way his hands worked when he was fixing something. He was careful, methodical, never rushed, never careless. It was unsettling. Not because it was bad, but because it wasn't, and that scared her more than anything. On Thursday, they rode out together to check the northern fence line. It was a long stretch, prone to damage from wandering cattle and the occasional coyote, and Ethan liked to inspect it regularly. The ride was easy, the day clear and warm. They didn't talk much, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It rarely was anymore. When they reached the fence, Ethan dismounted and started walking the line, checking for breaks or weak spots. Eliza stayed on her horse, scanning the horizon. That's when she saw them. 2 riders coming from the east. "Ethan," she said. He looked up, followed her gaze, and his expression hardened. "Stay here," he said. "Who are they?" "Don't know, but I'm about to find out." He walked toward the riders, his hand resting casually on his belt, not near his gun, but close enough. Eliza dismounted, ignoring his instruction, and followed a few paces behind. The riders pulled up about 20 feet away. Both men, both rough-looking, with the kind of faces that had seen too many bar fights and not enough consequences. "Help you?" Ethan asked, his tone neutral. The taller of the 2 grinned. "Heard you got yourself a new housekeeper." "That's my business." Sure, just making conversation." The man's eyes slid past Ethan to Eliza, and his grin widened. "She is pretty up close, as they say?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "You need to leave." "Oh, come on, we're just being friendly." "You're trespassing. That's not friendly." The second man spoke up, his voice flat and mean. "We heard she used to work in Chicago, in one of those boarding houses where the girls are. Real accommodating." Eliza felt ice flood her veins. "That true?" the first man asked, leaning forward in his saddle. "You accommodating, sweetheart?" Ethan moved so fast Eliza barely saw it. One moment he was standing still, the next he had the man's reins in his hand and was yanking him halfway out of the saddle. "Say another word," Ethan said, his voice low and deadly, "and I'll break your jaw." The man's grin vanished. "Hey, easy. Get off my land." The second man reached for something, a rifle, maybe, but Ethan's hand dropped to his gun, and the movement was enough to make him freeze. "Don't," Ethan said. "You won't like how this ends." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Then the first man jerked his reins free, spat into the dirt, and turned his horse around. "You're making a mistake, Cross," he said. "Shacking up with her. People are going to talk. Let them. And when they do more than talk, when they decide you're not worth the trouble anymore, then I'll deal with it, just like I'm dealing with you." The men rode off, their laughter echoing across the empty land. Ethan watched them go, his shoulders rigid, his hands curled into fists. Eliza stood frozen, her heart pounding. "Ethan, don't." His voice was sharp. "Just don't." "I didn't. I know you didn't." He turned to her, and she saw the anger in his eyes, not at her, but at them, at the world, at the unfairness of it all. "But they don't care. They've already decided who you are, and nothing you say or do is going to change that." Eliza felt something break inside her. "Then maybe I should leave." "No, Ethan, no." He stepped closer, his eyes fierce. "You're not running because of them. You hear me? You're not giving them that satisfaction. This isn't about satisfaction. It's about survival, yours and mine. We're surviving just fine." "Are we?" She gestured toward the retreating riders. "Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like we're one bad day away from something we can't take back." Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe, but I'd rather face that day with you here than watch you leave because someone else told you to." Eliza stared at him, her throat tight. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does it matter so much to you?" Ethan looked away, out at the horizon, and for a long time he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because I know what it's like to be alone. To have the world tell you you're not worth anything, to believe it, and I'm not letting that happen to you." Eliza felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. You can't protect me from everything. Maybe not, but I can try. They stood there, the wind picking up around them, the sky wide and endless overhead. And for the first time, Eliza realized something. She didn't want to leave, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because, against all logic and reason, this place, this man, had started to feel like home. And that terrified her more than anything. They rode back in silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on both of them. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She paced the small bedroom, her mind racing. The encounter with those men had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Not because of what they'd said, she'd heard worse, but because of what it meant. People were watching, judging, waiting for her to fail. And if she stayed, Ethan would pay the price. She thought about leaving in the night, just packing her trunk and walking until she found a town big enough to disappear in. It would be easier that way, cleaner. But even as the thought crossed her mind, she knew she wouldn't do it. Not because she couldn't, but because Ethan had asked her to stay. And somewhere along the way, his opinion had started to matter more than anyone else's. The next morning, she found him in the barn, mucking out stalls. I'm not leaving, she said without preamble. Ethan looked up, surprised. Okay. I mean it. I'm staying, whatever happens. Good. But I need you to understand something. What's that? I'm not staying because I owe you, or because I'm afraid. I'm staying because I want to. Ethan set down the pitchfork, wiped his hands on his pants. All right. That's it? Just all right? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something more than 2 words. Ethan's mouth twitched. You want a speech? Maybe. Well, you're not getting one. Eliza felt a reluctant smile tug at her lips. You're impossible. So I've been told. They stood there staring at each other, and Eliza felt something shift, something warm and unfamiliar and dangerous. I should get back to work, she said finally. Yeah, me too. But neither of them moved. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. Eliza? Yeah? I'm glad you're staying. Her smile widened. Yeah, me too. The following Sunday, Ethan had to go into town again. Church day, which meant the streets would be full and the stores would be closed, but he needed to see the blacksmith about a broken hinge that couldn't wait. Eliza went with him. Not because she wanted to, she had no interest in facing the stares and whispers again, but because Ethan had asked and she'd run out of reasons to say no. The town was exactly as she'd expected. Women in their Sunday best, men in clean shirts, children running between the buildings. Everything neat and proper and suffocating. They drew stares the moment they arrived. Ethan ignored them. Eliza tried to. The blacksmith shop was on the edge of town, a squat building that smelled of smoke and metal. Ethan went inside and Eliza waited by the wagon, her arms crossed, her eyes on the ground. Miss Rowan. She looked up. A young woman was approaching, maybe a few years older than Eliza, with kind eyes and a hesitant smile. My name's Sarah, the woman said. Sarah Bennett. I just wanted to say hello. Eliza blinked, caught off guard. Hello. I know things have been difficult for you. With the town, I mean, people can be unkind. That's one word for it. Sarah glanced around, lowered her voice. I don't believe the things they're saying about you and Mr. Cross. I think what he did, taking you in, was decent. Brave, even. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. I just thought you should know. Not everyone here is like Mrs. Carmichael. Could have fooled me. Sarah smiled sadly. I know. But there are a few of us who don't think charity's a sin. And if you ever need anything, a friend, someone to talk to, you can find me at the boarding house, the small one, on the east side, not Mrs. Carmichael's. I'll remember that. Sarah nodded, started to walk away, then paused. And Miss Rowan? Don't let them drive you away. You deserve to be here just as much as anyone. Before Eliza could respond, Sarah disappeared into the crowd. Eliza stood there, stunned. When Ethan emerged from the blacksmith shop, he found her still staring after Sarah. You all right? He asked. Yeah. Eliza said slowly. Yeah, I think I am. But as they climbed back onto the wagon and started the ride home, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. Because in her experience, moments of kindness were usually followed by something much darker. And this town wasn't done with them yet. That night, a storm rolled in, fast and vicious, the kind that made the walls shake and the windows rattle. Ethan secured the animals, checked the barn, and came inside soaked to the bone. Eliza handed him a towel. You should change. You'll catch your death. I'm fine. You're dripping on the floor. It's my floor. Ethan. He sighed, took the towel, and disappeared into the other room. When he came back, his hair was still damp, but he'd changed into dry clothes. He sat by the stove, warming his hands, and Eliza brought him coffee. Thanks, he said. Don't mention it. They sat in silence, listening to the rain hammer the roof. You ever think about leaving? Eliza asked suddenly. Ethan looked at her. Leaving where? Here. Montana. All of it. Sometimes. Why don't you? He shrugged. Where would I go? Anywhere. Anywhere's just another version of here. Different faces, same problems. Eliza considered that. I suppose that's true. Why do you ask? Just curious. Ethan studied her. You thinking about leaving? No, not anymore. Good. They lapsed back into silence, but it felt different now, charged somehow, like the storm outside had stirred something inside. Eliza, Ethan said quietly. Yeah? Those men, yesterday, what they said about you, about Chicago. Her stomach tightened. What about it? Was any of it true? Eliza's first instinct was to lie, to deflect, to protect herself the way she always had. But then she looked at Ethan, at the man who'd taken her in, defended her, stood by her, and she realized he deserved better than that. I worked in a boarding house, she said slowly. But not the kind they implied. It was a place for working women, seamstresses, laundresses, shopgirls. We paid rent, we followed rules, and we kept our heads down. But the owner, she had certain expectations about how we should act, how we should entertain male guests if they visited. Ethan's expression didn't change. Did you? No. I refused. And when I refused too many times, she kicked me out. No references, no pay, nothing. I tried to find other work, but without references. She trailed off. Gerald Dawson's ad seemed like a way out, a fresh start. I thought maybe out here things would be different. They are different. Are they? Because it feels like I just traded one set of judgments for another. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes serious. I don't care what you did before you came here. I don't care what you had to do to survive. All I care about is who you are now. And right now, you're the hardest working, most stubborn, most capable person I've ever met. So whatever those men said, whatever this town thinks, it doesn't change that. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. You're a good man, Ethan Cross. Don't be so sure about that. I am sure. He looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. Outside, the storm raged on, and inside, something quietly, irrevocably changed. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and strangely quiet. Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee drifting from the main room. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face, and stepped out to find Ethan already at the table, a cup in his hands. Morning, he said without looking up. Morning. She poured herself coffee, sat across from him. Sleep well? Well enough. They fell into an easy silence, the kind that had become common between them. But something felt different today. The air was heavier, charged with something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Ethan set down his cup. I need to ride out to the western pasture. One of the posts came loose in the storm. You want to come? Sure. They saddled up and rode out together, the land still damp from the rain, the sky a brilliant cloudless blue. The work was simple. Reset the post, reinforce it with rocks, test its stability. They worked side by side, barely speaking, moving with the kind of rhythm that came from weeks of shared labor. When they finished, Ethan stepped back, wiped his hands on his pants. That should hold. Until the next storm. Until the next storm, he agreed. They stood there for a moment, surveying their work, and then Ethan said, "You've gotten good at this." Eliza glanced at him. "At what?" "All of it. The work, the ranch, being out here." "I had a good teacher." "I didn't teach you half of what you know. You figured most of it out yourself." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. "Well, I'm stubborn. You said so yourself." "That I did." They mounted their horses and started back toward the house, but halfway there, Ethan pulled up short. "What is it?" Eliza asked. He was staring at something in the distance. She followed his gaze and saw it, a rider coming fast from the direction of town. "Stay close," Ethan said quietly. They waited as the rider approached. It was a young man, maybe 17 or 18, his face flushed from the hard ride. "Mr. Cross," he gasped, pulling his horse to a stop. "Sorry to bother you, but Mrs. Bennett sent me. Said to tell you there's trouble in town." Ethan's expression darkened. "What kind of trouble?" "Some men. Talking about you. And Miss Rowan. They were drinking at the saloon last night, and things got heated. Mrs. Bennett thought you should know." "Who were they?" "I don't know all their names, but one of them was that fellow who came by your place a few days back. The tall one with the scar on his face." Ethan's jaw tightened. "All right. Thanks for the warning." The boy nodded, turned his horse, and rode off. Eliza looked at Ethan. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing. Ethan, I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of a response. That's what they want. A fight. Something they can use to justify whatever they're planning. And if they come here, then I'll deal with it, but I'm not going looking for trouble." Eliza wanted to argue, but she could see the resolve in his eyes. He'd made up his mind, and nothing she said would change it. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but the unease settled over them like fog. That night, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She moved through her evening chores mechanically, her mind elsewhere. When she finally sat down to dinner, she barely touched her food. Ethan noticed. "You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." "Eliza." "I said I'm not hungry." He set down his fork, studied her. "You're scared." "I'm not." She stopped, exhaled. "Fine. Yes, I'm scared. Are you happy?" "No, but at least you're being honest." "What good does honesty do? Those men are out there, talking about us, planning who knows what, and we're just sitting here waiting for them to make the first move." "What else would you have me do?" "I don't know. Something. Anything." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I've been in fights before, Eliza, more than I care to count. And I've learned that the man who throws the first punch usually loses, because he's acting out of anger, not strategy. So yeah, we wait, we prepare, but we don't go looking for a fight we might not be able to finish." Eliza wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Still, the waiting gnawed at her. "I hate this," she said quietly. "I know. I hate feeling powerless." "You're not powerless. You're here. You're standing your ground. That takes more strength than most people have." She looked at him across the table, and something passed between them, something raw and unspoken. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "if something happens, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, then we'll handle it, together." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Together. Eliza felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying and impossible to ignore. But before she could say anything, a sound cut through the night, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. Ethan was on his feet in an instant, his hand on the rifle he kept by the door. "Get inside," he said. "Lock the door. Don't come out unless I tell you to." "I'm not hiding while you—" "Eliza, please." The urgency in his voice stopped her. She nodded, back toward the bedroom, but left the door cracked so she could see. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, and waited. The riders came into view moments later, 5 of them, moving in a loose formation. They pulled up in the yard, and Eliza recognized the tall one from before, the one with the scar. He was grinning, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "Evening, Cross," he called out. "State your business, Ethan said, his voice flat. "Just came by to talk." "Doesn't look like talking to me." The man's grin widened. "You're a suspicious fellow, aren't you?" "I'm a careful one. Now say what you came to say and get off my property." One of the other men spoke up, his voice slurred. "We don't like what you're doing here, Cross. Bringing that woman into town like she's respectable, making the rest of us look bad. How I run my life is none of your concern. It is when it affects our families. Our wives and daughters see her walking around like she's one of them, and it gives them ideas, bad ideas." Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened. "Miss Rowan hasn't done anything wrong. She's living with you, unmarried. That's wrong enough. She's my guest, and last I checked, this is still my land. What happens here is my business." The tall man leaned forward in his saddle. "See, that's where you're wrong, because what happens here affects the whole town, and the town's decided we've had enough." "The town," Ethan said slowly, "can mind its own business." "Can it?" The man's smile turned cruel. "Or maybe the town decides you're not welcome anymore. Maybe the town decides to make things difficult for you." Ethan raised the rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at anyone, but the message was clear. "You threatening me?" "Just stating facts." "Then here's a fact for you. You're on my property, uninvited, and if you don't leave in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to assume you're here to cause trouble. And I deal with trouble the way my father taught me, quickly and permanently." The men shifted in their saddles, uneasy. The tall man's grin faded. "You'd shoot us?" "If I had to, but I'd rather not. So why don't you turn those horses around and ride back to whatever hole you crawled out of?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the tall man spat into the dirt. "This isn't over, Cross." "Yes, it is. Now get out." The men hesitated, then slowly turned their horses and rode off, their laughter echoing across the empty land. Ethan watched them go, the rifle still in his hands, his shoulders rigid. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Eliza stepped out onto the porch. "Ethan!" He turned to her, and she saw the anger in his eyes. Not at her, but at them, at the injustice of it all. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't. This is my fault." "No, it's not. It's theirs, and they'll pay for it." "How?" "I don't know yet, but they will." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Maybe I should just go. End this before it gets worse." Ethan crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me. You're not going anywhere, you hear me? You're not running because of them. We're going to stand our ground, and we're going to outlast them, because that's what people like us do. We survive." Eliza stared up at him, her heart pounding. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are. I've seen it. What if I'm not? Then I'll be strong enough for both of us." His hands were still on her shoulders, his eyes locked on hers, and Eliza felt something break open inside her, something she'd been holding back for weeks. "Ethan?" she whispered. "Yeah? I don't want to be alone anymore." His expression softened. "You're not alone. You haven't been for a long time." And then, before either of them could think better of it, he pulled her into his arms. Eliza froze for half a second, and then she melted into him, her face pressed against his chest, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt. He held her tight, one hand in her hair, the other around her waist. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. They stood like that for a long time, neither of them speaking, neither of them willing to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza looked up at him, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "Ethan, I know," he said quietly. "I know." They didn't say anything else, didn't need to, because whatever was happening between them, whatever had been building for weeks, had finally broken through the surface, and there was no going back. The next morning, Eliza woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Ethan reinforcing the barn door, adding extra boards, extra locks. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making sure they can't get in." "You think they'll come back?" "I think they're not done with us yet." Eliza watched him work, her stomach tight with worry. "We can't live like this, waiting for them to make the next move. We won't have to, not for long." "What does that mean?" Ethan paused, set down the hammer. "It means I'm going into town tomorrow, and I'm going to have a conversation with the sheriff." "The sheriff won't help. He's probably on their side." "Maybe, but he's also a man who likes to keep the peace. And if I make it clear that these men are threatening violence on my property, he'll have to do something. Or he'll do nothing, and they'll come back worse than before." Ethan looked at her. "You got a better idea?" Eliza didn't, and that was the problem. They worked in silence for the rest of the morning, and when noon came, Eliza made lunch while Ethan finished securing the barn. They ate on the porch, the sun high and hot, the air thick with tension. "I'm coming with you," Eliza said suddenly. Ethan looked up. "What?" "To town. Tomorrow. I'm coming with you." "No." "Yes." "Eliza, I'm not hiding here while you face this alone. If we're in this together, then we're in it together. All of it." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one." "Too bad." Despite everything, Ethan almost smiled. "Fine, you can come, but you stay close. And you don't argue with me if I tell you to do something." "I can't promise that." "Eliza." All right, I'll try." "Good enough." They finished their lunch in silence, and as the afternoon wore on, Eliza found herself thinking about what tomorrow might bring. She wasn't afraid of the men, not really, but she was afraid of losing this, the life she'd built here, the fragile sense of belonging she'd found. And most of all, she was afraid of what it would mean if Ethan got hurt because of her. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ethan said, "You don't have to do this, you know." "Do what?" "Come with me tomorrow. It might get ugly." "I know." "And you're still coming." "Yes." "Why?" Eliza looked at him, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "Because you stood up for me when no one else would. The least I can do is stand beside you." Ethan's expression softened. "You don't owe me anything." "I know, but I wanted to be there anyway." He nodded slowly. "All right." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Then Ethan said, "Eliza?" "Yeah?" "If something happens tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. But if it does, then we'll handle it together." She used his own words against him, and Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. Fair enough. They stayed up late that night, talking about nothing and everything, and when Eliza finally went to bed, she felt strangely calm. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it, together. The ride into town the next day was quiet. Ethan rode with his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the horizon. Eliza sat beside him on the wagon seat, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She was nervous, but she didn't let it show. The town was busy when they arrived, people moving between shops, children playing in the street, the usual rhythms of a weekday. But as soon as Ethan and Eliza climbed down from the wagon, the stares began. Whispers followed them as they walked toward the sheriff's office. Ethan ignored them. Eliza tried to. The sheriff was a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a face that had seen too many hard winters. He looked up as they entered, his expression neutral. "Mr. Cross," he said. "Miss Rowan, what can I do for you?" "We need to talk," Ethan said. "In private." The sheriff glanced at Eliza, then nodded. "All right, have a seat." They sat, and Ethan laid out what had happened. The men who'd come to his property, the threats they'd made, the fact that he was concerned for both his safety and Eliza's. The sheriff listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Ethan finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, it's a fact." "Do you have witnesses? Anyone who can corroborate your story?" "Just Miss Rowan." The sheriff's eyes flicked to Eliza. And you saw these men? I heard them, she said. From inside the house. So you didn't see their faces? No, but I heard their voices, and I heard what they said. The sheriff was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Look, Mr. Cross, I understand your concern, but unless these men actually do something, commit a crime, cause damage, there's not much I can do. They threatened us. Words aren't crimes. They will be when those words turn into action. The sheriff sighed. I'll keep an eye out, talk to a few people, see what I can find out. But beyond that, my hands are tied. Ethan's jaw tightened. So we're just supposed to wait until they burn my house down? I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying the law has limits, and I can't arrest men for talking. Ethan stood abruptly. Then the law's useless. Mr. Cross. But Ethan was already walking toward the door. Eliza followed, her heart pounding. Outside, Ethan stood on the boardwalk, his hands clenched into fists. That was a waste of time, he said. Maybe, but at least we tried. Trying doesn't mean anything if nothing changes. Eliza touched his arm. Ethan, we'll figure this out. He looked at her and she saw the frustration in his eyes. I don't know how. We will. We have to. Before Ethan could respond, a voice cut through the noise of the street. Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple. They turned. Gerald Dawson was standing a few feet away, his expression smug. Eliza felt her stomach drop. Mr. Dawson, Ethan said, his voice flat. Mr. Cross. Gerald tipped his hat mockingly. And Miss Rowan. Or should I say, the woman who wasn't good enough for me, but apparently good enough for you. Ethan stepped forward, his hand dropping to his belt. Watch your mouth. Gerald smiled. Struck a nerve, did I? I'm warning you. You know, Cross, I've been thinking. Maybe I made a mistake. Maybe Miss Rowan here deserves a second chance. Eliza's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? She asked. Gerald's smile widened. I'm talking about taking you back, offering you the life I promised. Marriage, stability, respectability. All the things you threw away when you decided to shack up with this man. I didn't throw anything away. You rejected me. And now I'm unrejecting you. Ethan stepped between them. She's not interested. I wasn't talking to you. Too bad. Because I'm the one you're dealing with. Gerald's expression hardened. You think you're protecting her? You're not. You're ruining her. Everyone in this town knows it. And sooner or later, she'll know it too. Eliza pushed past Ethan. I already know. And I'd rather be ruined with him than respectable with you. Gerald's face twisted with anger. You ungrateful? Enough, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. You've said your piece. Now walk away before this gets ugly. Gerald stared at him, his eyes full of contempt. Then he turned to Eliza. When this falls apart, and it will, don't come crawling back to me. I won't, Eliza said, because I'd rather die alone than spend one day with you. Gerald's face went red. For a moment it looked like he might lunge at her, but then he spat at her feet and walked away. Eliza stood there, shaking with rage and adrenaline, her fists clenched. Ethan put a hand on her shoulder. You all right? No, but I will be. They climbed back onto the wagon in silence, and as they rode out of town, Eliza felt the stares following them. But this time she didn't care, because she'd made her choice, and there was no going back. The ride back felt longer than it should have. The wagon wheels creaked over the rutted road, and neither of them spoke. Eliza kept her eyes on the horizon, her jaw tight, her hands folded in her lap so Ethan wouldn't see them shaking. She'd meant every word she'd said to Gerald Dawson, every single one. But standing up to him in the middle of town with half the population watching had drained something out of her. Not courage, she still had that. But the thin veneer of composure she'd been holding on to was cracking. Ethan finally broke the silence. You didn't have to say all that. Yes, I did. He was trying to get a rise out of you. You gave him exactly what he wanted. Eliza turned to him, her eyes flashing. What I gave him was the truth. And if that makes things harder for us, then so be it. I'm done pretending. I'm not asking you to pretend. Then what are you asking? Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. I'm asking you to be careful, because men like Gerald don't take humiliation well. And when they don't get what they want, they find other ways to hurt you. Oh, let him try. Eliza, I mean it, Ethan. I'm not afraid of him. I'm not afraid of any of them. Maybe you should be. She stared at him, surprised by the edge in his voice. You think I should have taken him up on his offer? Gone back to him? No, but I think you underestimate how vindictive people can be when you reject them. I didn't reject him. He rejected me, remember? And now you've rejected him back, publicly, in front of the whole town. That's different. Eliza looked away, her chest tight. She knew he was right, but she also knew she couldn't have done anything differently. I'm not going to apologize for standing up for myself, she said quietly. I'm not asking you to. Then what do you want from me? Ethan exhaled slowly. I want you to understand that this isn't over. Gerald's pride is wounded, and wounded pride makes men dangerous. They lapsed back into silence, and when the ranch finally came into view, Eliza felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. Home. It was strange how quickly this place had become that. They unhitched the wagon, tended to the horses, and went through the evening chores in near silence. The tension between them wasn't angry, it was something else, something heavier, something that felt like worry wrapped in care. By the time they sat down to dinner, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that reminded Eliza of fire. She pushed food around her plate, not really eating. You need to eat, Ethan said. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten all day. I'll eat when I'm ready. Ethan set down his fork, the sound sharp in the quiet room. What's going on? Nothing. Don't do that. Do what? Shut me out. Eliza looked up at him, and the concern in his eyes made something twist in her chest. I'm not shutting you out. Then talk to me. About what? About whatever's eating at you. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, measuring out seconds that felt like hours. Finally, she said, I keep thinking about what Gerald said, about me ruining you. Ethan's expression hardened. That's not true. Isn't it? Look at what's happened since I got here. The town hates you. Men are threatening you. Your reputation is... My reputation is fine. Ethan, I mean it. I don't care what those people think, and you shouldn't either. But I do care, because you've done nothing but help me, and all I've brought you is trouble. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. You want to know what you've brought me? What? Company, purpose, someone who actually gives a damn whether I live or die. That's not trouble, Eliza. That's the opposite. She felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. They stared at each other across the table, and Eliza felt something shift, something warm and terrifying and impossible to ignore. Ethan, she said softly, what are we doing? What do you mean? This, us, what is this? He was quiet for a moment, then he said, I don't know, but I know I don't want it to stop. Eliza's breath caught. Neither do I. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She could see him processing it, could see the wheels turning behind his eyes as he tried to figure out what to say next. Before either of them could say anything else, a sound cut through the silence, distant at first, then growing louder. Thunder. They both looked toward the window. The sky, which had been clear moments ago, was now dark with clouds rolling in from the west, massive and bruised looking. Storm's coming, Ethan said, standing abruptly. I need to secure the barn. I'll help. They worked quickly, moving animals into shelter, tying down anything that might blow away, checking windows and doors. The wind picked up, howling across the open land like something alive and angry. Eliza's skirts whipped around her legs, and she had to squint against the dust and debris flying through the air. By the time they finished, the first raindrops were starting to fall. Fat, heavy drops that hit the ground like bullets. They made it inside just as the storm broke in earnest. Rain hammered the roof, loud as gunfire. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder so deep Eliza felt it in her bones. She stood by the window, watching the storm rage, and felt a strange exhilaration mixed with fear. Ethan came up beside her. "You all right?" "Yeah, just watching. It's going to be a bad one." "How can you tell?" "The way the wind's blowing, the color of the sky. I've seen storms like this before." "To me, yeah." He paused. "We should stay inside tonight. Make sure nothing catches fire if lightning strikes." Eliza nodded, but as the storm intensified, she felt her unease grow. There was something ominous about this storm, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. They sat by the fire, listening to the wind howl and the rain pound. Hours passed. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. Ethan tried to read, but Eliza could see he was just as restless as she was. He kept glancing at the windows, at the door, his body tense like he was waiting for something. "Tell me something," Eliza said suddenly, needing to break the oppressive silence. Ethan looked up. "What?" "Anything. Tell me about before, about how you ended up here." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down his book. "Not much to tell." "I don't believe that." "It's true. I grew up in Kansas, farmland. My father worked himself to death trying to keep the place running. When he died, my mother followed 6 months later. I sold the farm, came out here looking for something different." "And did you find it?" "I found land. I found work. I found quiet." "That's all?" Ethan looked at her. "That was all I needed, until you showed up." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest. "I changed things for you?" "You changed everything." She didn't know what to say to that. The honesty in his voice, the weight of it, made her throat tight. Around midnight, Eliza heard something that made her blood run cold. A different sound. Not thunder, not wind. Crackling. She jumped to her feet. "Do you hear that?" Ethan was already moving toward the door. "Stay here." "Like hell I will." He grabbed his coat, threw it on, and stepped outside. Eliza followed, and what she saw made her heart stop. The barn was on fire. Flames licked up the side of the structure, bright orange against the black sky, fed by the wind and seemingly impervious to the rain that couldn't come fast enough to stop it. "No," Ethan breathed, then louder, "No!" He ran toward the barn, and Eliza ran after him, her mind screaming at her to stop, to think, but her body moving on pure instinct. "The horses!" she shouted over the roar of the fire and storm. "I know!" Ethan threw open the barn door, and smoke billowed out, thick and choking. He disappeared inside, and Eliza's heart lurched into her throat. She grabbed a bucket, filled it from the water trough, and threw it uselessly at the flames. It did nothing. The fire was too big, too fast, too hungry. Ethan emerged moments later, leading 2 terrified horses. Their eyes were wild, their nostrils flaring. "Get them to the corral!" Eliza grabbed the reins, pulled the animals away from the inferno. Her eyes stung from the smoke, her lungs burned, but she kept moving, kept pulling them to safety. When she got back, Ethan was going in again. "Ethan, don't—" But he was already inside. Seconds felt like hours. Eliza stood in the rain, watching the flames consume the barn, terror clawing at her throat. The heat was intense even from where she stood, and she could hear the wood cracking and groaning as the structure began to collapse. Then Ethan emerged, coughing violently, his face streaked with soot, leading the last horse. The animal was panicked, fighting him, but he held firm. "That's all of them," he gasped. "What about the rest? The equipment, Gone. It's all gone." They stood there, watching the barn burn, the rain soaking them to the bone, and Eliza felt something break inside her. This wasn't an accident. Lightning didn't strike like that, didn't start a fire in the middle of a rainstorm. Someone had done this. She looked at Ethan, and she could see in his eyes that he knew it too. "They did this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Those men, they came here, and they— I know. But we have to— There's nothing we can do. Not tonight. But, Eliza." He grabbed her shoulders, made her look at him. "There's nothing we can do. The barn's gone. The animals are safe. That's all that matters right now. She wanted to argue, to scream, to do something other than stand there helpless. But the look in his eyes stopped her. They'd lost. Not the fight, but this battle. They retreated to the house, dripping wet, exhausted, and watched through the window as the barn burned itself out. The fire raged for another hour before the rain finally began to win, and by then there was nothing left but smoldering ruins. Eliza sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't drink, watching Ethan pace the room like a caged animal. "We need to go to the sheriff," she said finally. "No. Ethan, no. We have no proof. And even if we did, you think he'd do anything? The same sheriff who told us he couldn't help unless they actually committed a crime? This is a crime, and we can't prove it. It'll look like lightning, like bad luck, and all we'll do is make ourselves look paranoid." Eliza wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The helplessness of it made her want to scream. "So they just get away with it?" "For now." "That's not good enough." Ethan stopped pacing, looked at her. "What do you want me to do, Eliza? Ride into town and start shooting? That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" "We survive, we rebuild, we outlast them, because that's the only way people like us win." Eliza stared at him, her chest tight. "I hate this. I know. I hate feeling powerless. I know." She stood up, crossed the room to him. "Promise me something." "What?" "Promise me we won't let them break us. Whatever happens next, we don't give them that satisfaction." Ethan looked down at her, and some of the anger in his eyes softened. "I promise. No matter what. No matter what." She nodded, trying to believe him, trying to hold on to that promise, even as everything felt like it was falling apart. By dawn, all that was left of the barn was a blackened skeleton. Ethan stood on the porch, staring at the ruins, his face expressionless. He'd been out there for over an hour, just standing there, and Eliza didn't know what to say to him. She brought him coffee. He took it, but didn't drink. "What are you thinking?" she asked quietly. "I'm thinking about how much it's going to cost to rebuild, how much time we've lost, how we're going to make it through the winter without proper shelter for the animals. We'll figure it out. Will we?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something close to defeat in his eyes. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Eliza. The constant fighting, the constant struggle, it never ends. So what are you saying? You want to give up?" "No, but I'm tired and I'm running out of options." Eliza felt panic rise in her chest. "Ethan, listen to me. We can rebuild. It's just wood and nails. We've done it before." "With what money? I barely have enough saved to get through the winter, and now I need to replace all the equipment, all the tools, all the feed we stored. Then we'll sell something. The land, the cattle, whatever we have to." "I can't sell the land. This is all I have." "You have me." The words came out before she could stop them, raw and honest and desperate. Ethan stared at her. "What?" "You have me," she repeated, "and I'm not going anywhere. So we figure this out. Together." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down the coffee cup and pulled her into his arms. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the morning light, and slowly, Eliza felt some of the tension leave his body. "All right," he said finally, "we figure it out together. Promise?" "Promise." The next few days were brutal. Ethan threw himself into salvaging what he could from the barn, sorting through charred wood and twisted metal. Most of it was useless, but he saved what he could, methodical and silent. Eliza helped where she could, but the work was slow and heartbreaking. Every piece of ruined equipment, every tool they couldn't save, felt like another blow. The animals were skittish, unsettled by the fire and the loss of their shelter. They had to rig up temporary cover using tarps and spare lumber, and it was barely adequate. Money was tight. Ethan had some savings, but not enough to rebuild the barn properly, and winter was coming. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the blackened remains, Ethan said, "I need to sell some land." Eliza looked at him sharply. "What?" "The northern section. About 40 acres. It's not much, but it'll bring in enough to rebuild the barn and get us through the winter." "You can't sell your land." "I don't have a choice. There has to be another way." "There isn't." Eliza felt panic rise in her chest. Who would you sell to? I don't know yet. I'll put the word out, see who's interested. And if the wrong person buys it, if Gerald or Mrs. Carmichael or one of those men, then I'll deal with it. But right now I need money. And land is the only thing I have to sell. Eliza wanted to argue, but she could see the resignation in his eyes. He'd already made up his mind. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She thought about the trunk under the bed, the one she'd brought with her from Chicago. Inside were the last remnants of her old life. A few dresses, some jewelry her mother had left her, nothing valuable, but precious to Eliza. A small sum of money she'd saved over the years, hidden in the lining where no boarding house owner or desperate roommate could find it. It wasn't much, maybe $50. Nowhere near enough to rebuild a barn, but it was something. The next morning, she found Ethan in the yard, measuring what was left of the barn's foundation. I have money, she said without preamble. He looked up. What? I have money. Not a lot, but some. It's yours. Eliza, before you argue, just listen. I've been living here for months, eating your food, using your resources, contributing nothing financially. Let me help. You contribute plenty. Not like this. Please, Ethan, let me do this. He studied her for a long moment, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, pride warring with practicality. How much? $50, maybe a little more. Ethan's eyes widened. That's Eliza. That's your money, your safety net. My safety net is you, this place. I don't need money tucked away for someday. I need this ranch to survive now. I can't take it. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference. Ethan looked torn, his jaw working. Finally, he said, I'll borrow it, and I'll pay you back. You don't have to. Yes, I do, with interest. Despite everything, Eliza smiled. Fine, with interest. She went inside, retrieved the money from her trunk, and brought it to him. Ethan took it, his hands careful, like he was holding something sacred. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me. Just build the barn. I will. Good. Combined with what Ethan had saved and the money from selling a few head of cattle he could spare, they had enough. Barely. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked from sunup to sundown. Ethan hired a few men from town, ones who didn't ask questions and didn't judge, men who needed work and didn't care about gossip, and together they raised the frame of a new barn. It was smaller than the old one, simpler, but it was solid. Eliza worked alongside them, hauling lumber, holding beams in place, hammering nails until her hands blistered and bled. She wrapped them in cloth and kept working. The men didn't say much, but she caught them watching her sometimes, their expressions a mix of surprise and grudging respect. She didn't care what they thought. She just worked. One afternoon, as they were taking a break, one of the men, a grizzled fellow named Tom, who'd helped rebuild half the structures in town, said, You got yourself a good woman there, Cross. Ethan glanced at Eliza, who was wiping sweat from her forehead, her dress dirty and her hair coming loose from its pins. Yeah, I do. Tom grinned, showing gaps where teeth used to be. You planning to make it official? Ethan's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. Fair enough, just saying a woman who works like that, you'd be a fool to let her go. Ethan didn't respond, but Eliza saw the look on his face, something between pride and something else she couldn't quite name. Later that evening, after the men had gone home and they were cleaning up, Eliza said, You don't have to answer their questions, you know. I know. People are going to talk no matter what we do. I know that too. She hesitated, unsure if she should push. Does it bother you, what they said? Ethan set down the tool he was holding. Which part? The part about making it official. He was quiet for a moment, and Eliza's heart started to pound. Then he said, Would it bother you if I said it didn't? Eliza's breath caught. No. Good. They stood there in the fading light, the half-built barn behind them, and something passed between them, something that felt like a promise neither of them was quite ready to voice. The barn was finished 3 weeks after the fire. It wasn't perfect. The wood was rough in places, the paint was thin, and it didn't have half the storage space of the old one. But it stood, solid and strong and theirs. On the day they moved the animals back in, Ethan stood in the doorway, looking at what they'd built, and Eliza saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Pride. "It's good," she said, coming up beside him. "It'll do." "It's better than that." Ethan turned to her. "We did this. You did this. No, we did this. Together." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest, chasing away some of the cold that had settled there since the fire. "Yeah, we did." That night they celebrated with a simple meal and a bottle of whiskey Ethan had been saving for a special occasion. They sat on the porch, passing the bottle back and forth, watching the stars come out. "I never thought I'd be here," Eliza said. "Where?" "Anywhere like this, with someone like you." Ethan took a sip of whiskey, the liquid catching the moonlight. "What does that mean? Someone like me?" "Someone good. Someone who doesn't want anything from me except me. That's because you're worth wanting, just as you are." Eliza looked at him, and the honesty in his eyes made her throat tight. "You really believe that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She took the bottle from him, drank, felt the burn slide down her throat and settle warm in her stomach. "I was afraid, when I first got here. Afraid you'd turn out like everyone else. Afraid this would all be some kind of trick. And now? Now I'm afraid of something different." "What?" "Losing this. Losing you." Ethan reached out, took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm, real. "You're not going to lose me." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." "How?" "Because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." Eliza squeezed his hand, her heart pounding. "Promise?" "Promise." They sat there in silence, hands linked, and for the first time since the fire, Eliza felt something close to peace. But peace, she was learning, was a fragile thing. 2 days later, Gerald Dawson rode up to the ranch, alone this time. No men flanking him, no smug grin, just him, on a horse, looking older than he had a few weeks ago, tired. Ethan and Eliza were in the yard when he arrived. Ethan's hand went to his belt, an automatic gesture, but Gerald held up both hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice weary. "Then why are you here?" Ethan asked, his tone flat. Gerald dismounted slowly, like his bones hurt. "I came to talk, to Miss Rowan." Eliza stepped forward, her chin raised. "I have nothing to say to you. Maybe not, but I have something to say to you." Ethan moved between them. "Whatever it is, you can say it to both of us." Gerald looked at him, then at Eliza. Something in his expression had changed. The arrogance was gone. "Fine. I came to apologize." Eliza blinked, stunned. "What?" "I was wrong. About you. About this whole situation. I let pride and anger get the better of me, and I said things I shouldn't have." "Why the sudden change of heart?" Ethan asked, his tone suspicious. Gerald sighed heavily. "Because I heard about the fire, and I heard about you rebuilding, and I realized something." "What's that?" "That you two are going to make it. No matter what anyone says or does, you're going to survive. And I've been wasting my energy fighting something that was never mine to begin with." Eliza stared at him. "So you came here to tell us we're resilient? That's your apology?" "No. I came here to tell you that I'm done. Done fighting you. Done trying to make you pay for rejecting me. I'm just done." There was something in his voice, something defeated and genuine, that made Eliza pause. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Gerald looked away toward the horizon. "I lost a lot in the past few weeks. Business deals fell through. People stopped trusting me. My reputation took a hit, and I realized it was because I was so focused on you two that I let everything else fall apart." "So this is about you," Ethan said flatly, "not about making amends." "Maybe, but I'm still here, and I'm still apologizing. That has to count for something." Eliza studied him, trying to see past the words to the truth underneath. "I don't forgive you." Gerald nodded, like he'd expected that. "I don't expect you to, but I wanted you to know that I'm not your enemy anymore, for whatever that's worth." It's worth nothing, Ethan said coldly. Now get off my property. Gerald climbed back on his horse with visible effort. Before he rode off, he looked at Eliza one last time. I hope you find what you're looking for, he said, even if it isn't with me. Then he turned and left, and they watched him go until he was just a speck on the horizon. Eliza stood there watching him disappear, feeling strangely hollow. Do you believe him? Ethan asked. I don't know, maybe. Does it matter? Depends. Do you think he's really done? Eliza thought about it. I think he's tired, and tired men make mistakes, but I also think he meant what he said, for now, at least. Ethan nodded slowly. Then we stay careful, keep our guard up. Always. They walked back toward the house side by side, and Eliza realized something. The fight wasn't over. Not completely, but they'd survived the worst of it, and that was something. That night, as they prepared for bed, Ethan said, You handled that well? With Gerald. Did I? Yeah, you didn't let him get to you. Didn't give him power over you. Eliza thought about that. I think I'm just tired of letting people like him dictate how I feel. He doesn't get to have that anymore. Good. She turned to him. Thank you. For what? For standing with me every time. Ethan crossed the room, cupped her face in his hands. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. And then he kissed her, and Eliza felt the last of the day's tension melt away. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, and that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed Gerald's visit were quieter than Eliza had expected. The gossip didn't stop. It never would, she realized, but it lost its teeth. People still stared when she and Ethan went into town, still whispered behind their hands, but the open hostility had dulled into something more manageable. Curiosity mixed with reluctant acceptance. Or maybe exhaustion. Maybe the town had simply grown tired of caring. Either way, Eliza didn't waste energy trying to figure it out. She had other things to focus on. The ranch was changing, not just the barn, but everything. She'd started a small vegetable garden behind the house, coaxing life out of the stubborn Montana soil. It wasn't much, some carrots, potatoes, a few herbs, but it was hers. Something she'd built with her own hands, something that proved she could create and not just survive. Ethan had noticed. He didn't say much, but she'd catch him looking at the neat rows, the careful spacing, the way she'd rigged up a makeshift fence to keep the rabbits out. Sometimes she'd see something in his expression that looked almost like pride. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, he said, You're good at that. At what? Making things grow. Eliza smiled, wiping dirt from under her fingernails. It's just vegetables. It's more than that. She looked at him, curious. What do you mean? Ethan was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When you first got here, this place was functional. It worked. But it didn't feel like much more than that. Now it feels different, like it's alive. That's the garden talking, and the chickens, and the fact that the barn doesn't look like it's about to collapse anymore. No, it's you. Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest, but she tried to deflect it. You give me too much credit. I don't give you enough. They sat in silence, the sun sinking low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The air was cooling, carrying the first hints of the autumn that would come soon. Then Ethan said, I've been thinking. About what? About us. Eliza's heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. What about us? Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. I know we haven't talked about it, about what this is, but I think we both know it's more than just convenience. I know. And I think we both know that people are going to keep talking, keep judging, unless we give them something they can't argue with. Eliza's breath caught. She knew what he was saying, but she needed to hear him say it. What are you saying? Ethan stood, crossed the porch, and knelt in front of her. Her heart stopped. I'm saying marry me, he said simply, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. Not because of them. Not because it's the respectable thing to do. But because I want you here. Permanently. As my partner, my equal, my wife. Eliza stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't how she'd imagined it. Not that she'd let herself imagine it much. There was no ring, no grand gesture. Just Ethan, on his knees in the fading light, looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered. "You don't have to answer now, Eek," he said when she didn't respond immediately. "I know it's sudden. I know we haven't—" "Yes?" He blinked. "What?" "Yes, I'll marry you." Ethan's eyes widened, like he hadn't quite believed she'd say it. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He stood, pulled her to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. Then he kissed her. Not tentatively, not carefully, but with a certainty that took her breath away. When they finally pulled apart, Eliza was smiling wider than she had in months. "When?" "Soon, before winter sets in." "How soon?" "As soon as we can arrange it." Eliza laughed, feeling giddy and terrified and exhilarated all at once. "The town's going to lose its mind. Let them. Mrs. Carmichael's going to have something to say about it. I don't care. People are going to think—" "Eliza." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I don't care what they think. I only care what you think." She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but honesty. "I think we're doing the right thing. Then that's all that matters." They stood there on the porch, holding each other as the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Eliza felt something settle deep in her chest. This was real. This was happening. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. They went into town 3 days later to see the pastor. Ethan had wanted to wait, to give Eliza time to change her mind, but she'd insisted. If they were doing this, they were doing it now. No delays, no second guessing. The pastor was an older man named Reverend Hayes, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Eliza at ease. He didn't ask questions when Ethan explained what they wanted. Didn't lecture them about propriety or timing or what people would say. He just nodded, checked his calendar, and told them he could perform the ceremony the following Sunday. "That soon?" Eliza asked, surprised. "Is that a problem?" She looked at Ethan. He shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No," she said. "No problem." "Good. Then I'll see you both next Sunday. Shall we say 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock is perfect," Ethan said. As they left the small church, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunlight, they nearly collided with Sarah Bennett on the steps. "Miss Rowan?" Sarah said, her face lighting up. "Mr. Cross, what brings you here?" Eliza hesitated, unsure how to answer, but Ethan said without preamble, "We're getting married, Sunday." Sarah's eyes went wide, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. Then she broke into a huge smile that transformed her entire face. "That's wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you," Eliza said, surprised by the genuine warmth in Sarah's voice. "Will there be a reception? A party?" Ethan and Eliza exchanged glances. They hadn't thought that far ahead. The ceremony itself had seemed like enough to think about. "We weren't planning on it," Ethan said. "Well, you should. You deserve to celebrate." Sarah's smile turned mischievous. "And it would give the town something to talk about other than gossip." Eliza laughed despite herself. "I suppose you're right. I know I am. Listen, I'll spread the word. Get a few of the friendlier folks together. Nothing fancy, just cake and coffee at my boarding house after the ceremony. What do you say?" Eliza looked at Ethan. He shrugged, leaving the decision to her. "If you want to." "I want to," Eliza said, turning back to Sarah. "Thank you. That's very kind." "Nonsense. It's about time this town had something to celebrate that isn't someone else's misery." Sarah squeezed Eliza's hand. "I'm happy for you both. Truly." As Sarah walked away, humming to herself, Eliza felt something shift inside her. Maybe they weren't as alone as she'd thought. Maybe there were people in this town who saw past the gossip and the judgment to the truth underneath. "That was unexpected," Ethan said as they walked toward the wagon. "What was?" "Sarah. Her kindness." "She's been kind before." "I know, but this felt different, like she actually cares." "Maybe she does. Maybe." They climbed onto the wagon, and as Ethan guided the horses back toward the ranch, Eliza found herself thinking about Sarah's words, about celebrating, about having something good to focus on instead of all the bad. Do you think people will come? She asked. To the reception? Some will, some won't. And the ones who don't? Their loss. Eliza smiled. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. The people who matter will show up. The ones who don't matter. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, and thought maybe he was right. Maybe it really was that simple. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur. Eliza mended her best dress, the pale blue one she'd worn the day she arrived. It seemed fitting somehow, coming full circle. She washed it carefully, pressed it, fixed a torn seam. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, and it would do. Ethan cleaned himself up, shaved more carefully than usual, trimmed his hair. He even bought a new shirt in town, dark blue cotton, that made his eyes look darker, more intense. They worked side by side, preparing the ranch for a few hours of absence, making sure the animals would be fed and the chores would keep. The rhythm of their work together had become so natural that they barely needed to speak, each knowing what the other needed before they asked. On Saturday night, Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the small bedroom that had become hers. Tomorrow, she'd be married. Tomorrow, everything would change. Or maybe nothing would change. Maybe they'd just be making official what had already become true, that they belonged to each other, that they'd chosen each other, that they were building something worth keeping. She heard a soft knock on the door, pulling her from her thoughts. You awake? Ethan's voice, quiet in the darkness. Yeah. Can I come in? Sure. He opened the door, stood in the doorway. Even in the dim light, she could see he looked nervous, which was so unlike him that Eliza almost laughed. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing, I wanted to make sure you're okay with all this. I'm okay. You don't have any doubts? Do you? No. But I'm not the one who's been rejected and humiliated and dragged through the mud by this town. Eliza sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Ethan, I'm marrying you because I want to, not because I feel obligated, not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because I choose you. Every day. Is that clear enough? He smiled, and some of the tension left his shoulders. Yeah, that's clear. Good. Now go to bed. We have a big day tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. He turned to leave, but Eliza called out, Ethan? Yeah? I'm glad it's you. He looked back at her, his eyes soft in the moonlight streaming through the window. Me too. After he left, Eliza lay back down, but sleep was impossible. Her mind raced with thoughts of tomorrow, of what it would mean, of how her life had changed since that day at Gerald Dawson's gate. She thought about the girl she'd been, scared, desperate, certain her life was over. And she thought about the woman she'd become, stronger, braver, capable of things she'd never imagined. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, every single second. The morning of the wedding was clear and cold. Autumn had fully settled in, painting the landscape in golds and browns, and the air had that sharp quality that promised winter wasn't far behind. Eliza dressed carefully, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned her dress. She'd washed her hair the night before, and now she braided it, pinned it up in a simple style that felt appropriate. She looked at herself in the small mirror, and for a moment she didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked the same, but she felt different. When she stepped outside, Ethan was waiting by the wagon, dressed in his new shirt and dark pants. He'd shaved so closely his jaw looked almost bare, vulnerable. He looked good, better than good. Ready? He asked, his voice steady despite the occasion. Ready. The ride into town was quiet, but not uncomfortable. They held hands on the wagon seat, their fingers intertwined, and every so often, Ethan would glance at her and smile, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. When they arrived at the church, Eliza was surprised to find a small crowd waiting. Not the whole town, not even close, but enough people to fill the pews. Sarah was there, beaming like she'd orchestrated the whole thing. A few of the men who'd helped rebuild the barn stood awkwardly near the back. Some women Eliza didn't recognize, but who smiled at her kindly. And standing in the very back, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his Sunday best, was the sheriff. Ethan noticed him too. Didn't expect to see you here. The sheriff shrugged. his weathered face creasing into what might have been a smile. Figured I should show my face, make sure nobody causes trouble. You expecting trouble? No, but it doesn't hurt to be careful. Ethan nodded and they walked into the church together, Eliza's hand tucked into the crook of his arm. The ceremony was simple. Reverend Hayes spoke about commitment and partnership, about choosing to stand beside someone through hardship and joy. He didn't mention love. Eliza was grateful for that. Love was complicated, messy, not something that could be neatly packaged into vows and promises. But partnership? That she understood. When the Reverend asked if she took Ethan to be her husband, she didn't hesitate. I do. Her voice was clear and strong, and she saw something flash in Ethan's eyes. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. And when Ethan said the same, his voice steady and sure, Eliza felt something settle deep in her chest. This was real. This was happening. They were married. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Ethan kissed her, gently at first, then deeper, like he was sealing a promise. The small congregation applauded, and Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. This was a beginning, not an ending, and she wasn't going to cry. The reception at Sarah's boarding house was livelier than Eliza expected. There was cake. Sarah had baked it herself, 3 layers with white frosting, and coffee, and even a little music when someone pulled out a fiddle and started playing folk tunes that made people's feet tap. People laughed and talked and congratulated them, and for a few hours, Eliza let herself forget about everything else. She danced, if you could call it that, with Ethan, his hand on her waist, her hand on his shoulder, moving in circles that were more enthusiasm than skill. You're stepping on my feet, she said, laughing. You're stepping on mine. Then we're even. He pulled her closer, and she let him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the realness of this moment. She was dancing at her own wedding reception. A few months ago, she'd been standing at a gate with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Now she was here, and it felt like a miracle. She was mid-spin when she saw Mrs. Carmichael watching from the doorway. Eliza stiffened, her body going rigid in Ethan's arms. Ignore her, Ethan murmured, feeling the change in her. I'm trying. But Mrs. Carmichael didn't leave. Instead, she crossed the room with deliberate steps, her expression unreadable, and stood in front of them. The music continued, but several people had stopped dancing to watch. Mrs. Cross? She said, and the title sounded strange coming from her lips. Eliza blinked. It was the first time anyone had called her that. Mrs. Cross. She was Mrs. Cross now. Mrs. Carmichael, she replied carefully, her guard still up. The older woman was silent for a moment, her sharp eyes studying Eliza like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then she said, I was wrong about you. Eliza nearly dropped Ethan's hand. What? I said I was wrong. I judged you unfairly, made assumptions I had no right to make, and for that I apologize. Eliza didn't know what to say. She looked at Ethan, who looked just as stunned as she felt. I don't expect forgiveness, Mrs. Carmichael continued, her voice softer than Eliza had ever heard it. But I wanted you to know, you've proven yourself, to this town, to me, and that's not an easy thing to do. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Eliza standing there, speechless, her mind trying to process what had just happened. Did that just happen? She asked Ethan. I think so. I don't understand. Neither do I, but I'll take it. Eliza laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. The weight of Mrs. Carmichael's disapproval had been heavier than she'd realized, and having it lifted, even partially, felt like she could finally breathe properly. Yeah, me too. They stayed at the reception until late afternoon, and when they finally climbed back onto the wagon to head home, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon. Today was a good day, Eliza said, leaning against Ethan's shoulder. Yeah, it was. Thank you. Ethan glanced at her. For what? For choosing me. You chose me too. I know, but still, thank you. He squeezed her hand and they rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the kind that only existed between people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. When they reached the ranch, everything looked the same, but somehow different, like the place itself knew something had changed. Winter came hard and fast that year. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the ranch in white, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. The temperature dropped until the mornings were so cold that the water in the trough froze solid and their breath came out in clouds. But Eliza and Ethan were prepared. They'd stocked up on supplies, reinforced the barn, made sure the animals had adequate shelter. And when the worst of the storms hit, they stayed inside, huddled by the fire, working on small projects to pass the time. Eliza mended clothes, her needle moving in steady, practiced strokes. Ethan carved wood, small figures at first, then more complex pieces. A horse, a bird, a tiny woman that looked suspiciously like Eliza, though he never admitted it. They talked about plans for the spring, what they'd plant, what repairs they'd make, what improvements they could afford now that the barn was rebuilt and they had a little breathing room. It was during one of those long winter evenings, the wind howling outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, that Eliza realized something had changed inside her. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the cold, not of the isolation, not of what tomorrow might bring. She was home, really, truly home. One night, as they sat by the fire, Eliza's hands folded in her lap, she said quietly, "I think I'm pregnant." Ethan froze. The piece of wood he'd been carving slipping from his hands and clattering to the floor. "What?" "I said I think I'm pregnant." He stared at her, his expression unreadable, and for a long moment he didn't say anything. Then, "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I'm late, and I've been feeling different, tired, sick in the mornings." Ethan set down his knife with careful precision, like he was afraid if he moved too quickly, this moment would shatter. He moved closer to her on the bench. "How do you feel about it?" Eliza thought about it, trying to find the right words. Scared, but also excited? "Me too." "You're scared?" "Terrified." Eliza laughed, surprised. "You? You're never scared of anything." "That's not true. I'm scared of a lot of things. Failing, losing you, not being a good enough father." "You'll be a great father." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Ethan pulled her into his arms, held her close. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, fast and strong. "We're doing this then?" "We're already doing it, whether we're ready or not." "Then we'd better get ready." They sat there by the fire, holding each other, and Eliza felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't part of any plan she'd made, but it felt like exactly where she was supposed to be. This was their life now, messy, uncertain, beautiful, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the snow melting inch by inch until the ground was muddy and soft. The world transformed from white to brown to the first hints of green, and with each passing day, Eliza's belly grew. Morning sickness was brutal. There were days when she couldn't keep anything down, when the smell of coffee made her retch, when she had to sit down in the middle of chores because the world tilted sideways. But there was also wonder. The first time she felt the baby move, she'd grabbed Ethan's hand and pressed it to her stomach, watching his face light up when he felt the tiny flutter beneath his palm. "Did you feel that?" she'd asked. "Yeah, I felt it." "That's our baby." "Yeah, it is." They'd stood like that for a long time, his hand on her belly, both of them silent with awe. They worked together to prepare. Ethan built a cradle from scratch, sanding it smooth until there wasn't a single rough edge, painting it with careful precision. Eliza sewed blankets and tiny clothes, her hands clumsy at first but growing more confident with practice. Sarah visited occasionally, bringing food and supplies and gossip from town. Apparently, Eliza and Ethan's marriage had become something of a local legend, the story people told when they wanted to believe in second chances. "You're celebrities," Sarah said one afternoon, laughing as she helped Eliza fold tiny shirts. "People can't stop talking about you." "Great," Eliza muttered, rolling her eyes. "Just what I wanted." "It's not a bad thing. You've given people hope, shown them that second chances are possible, that you can start over, even when everything seems lost." Eliza hadn't thought about it like that. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe their story, messy and imperfect as it was, meant something to people who'd felt just as lost and rejected as she once had. "I never set out to be anyone's inspiration. Eliza said. The best inspirations never do. They just live their lives and let others learn from watching. Eliza thought about that as Sarah left, thought about all the people she'd never met who knew her story, who talked about her over dinner or in church or wherever people gathered to gossip and connect. It felt strange, invasive almost, but also meaningful. If her pain, her struggle, her survival could help someone else, then maybe it had been worth it. The baby came in late May, on a warm afternoon when the air smelled like fresh grass and wildflowers and new beginnings. The labor was long and brutal. Eliza had known it would be hard. She'd heard enough stories from other women to know what to expect, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. Hours of pain that felt like it would split her in two, of exhaustion so deep she wasn't sure she could continue, of wondering if she was strong enough to do this. But Ethan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement even when she screamed at him to shut up, to leave her alone, to stop talking. He didn't leave. He stayed. And when the baby finally came, a girl, tiny and red-faced and perfect, Eliza looked down at her daughter and felt something shift inside her, something fundamental and irreversible. This was what she'd been fighting for, this life, this future, this tiny person who depended on her completely. She's beautiful, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, tears streaming down his face without shame. She is, Eliza agreed, too exhausted to cry, too happy to do anything but stare. What should we name her? Eliza thought about it, about everything they'd been through, about the journey that had brought them here. Hope. Ethan smiled through his tears. Hope Cross. I like that. So do I. They sat there together, the three of them, and Eliza realized something profound. She'd spent so much of her life running from pain, from rejection, from the fear of not being enough. But here, in this moment, she wasn't running anymore. She was home. And home wasn't a place. It was these people, this feeling of belonging. Summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tiny milestones. Hope's first smile, which made Eliza cry with joy. Her first laugh, a sound so pure and delightful it made even the hardest days worthwhile. The way she gripped Ethan's finger with her impossibly small hand, like she knew he'd never let her fall. The ranch thrived. The garden produced more than they could eat, so they started selling vegetables in town, building relationships with shopkeepers and families who'd once looked at them with suspicion. The animals were healthy. The barn stood strong against summer storms. And Eliza and Ethan grew into their roles as parents, fumbling and learning, and somehow making it work. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hope asleep in Eliza's arms, Ethan said, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" "What do you mean?" "If I hadn't ridden past that day, if I'd kept going, if you'd gotten back on that wagon and left." Eliza thought about it, about the countless small decisions that had led them here. Sometimes, but not in a bad way. More like gratitude that things worked out the way they did. Me too. They sat in silence for a while, and then Eliza said, "You know what I've learned?" "What's that?" "That rejection isn't the end. It feels like it at the time. Feels like the world's telling you you're not good enough, not worth keeping. But sometimes rejection is just redirection, pushing you towards something better, something you wouldn't have found if you'd gotten what you thought you wanted." Ethan looked at her, his eyes reflecting the sunset. "You think that's what happened with us?" "I know it is. Gerald rejecting me led me to you, and you choosing me led to all of this." She gestured at the ranch, at Hope, at the life they'd built with their bare hands and stubborn hearts. "So yeah, rejection wasn't the end, it was the beginning." Ethan reached over, took her hand. "I'm glad you ended up at that gate." "Me too." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Eliza felt a sense of peace she'd never experienced before. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. There would be more hard winters, more struggles, more moments when they'd have to fight to keep what they'd built. But they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. The years that followed weren't easy. There were droughts that tested the land, turning the grass brown and the soil to dust. Illnesses that scared them. A fever that gripped Hope for 3 terrifying days. A broken leg when Ethan fell from a horse. Moments when money was so tight they had to make impossible choices about what to fix and what to let go. But they endured. Hope grew into a bright, curious child who loved the ranch as much as her parents did. She learned to ride before she could properly walk, her little legs barely reaching the stirrups. She learned to care for animals with a gentleness that made Eliza's heart ache. She learned that hard work and perseverance mattered more than anything else. The town eventually accepted them fully, not because they'd changed, but because the town had. New families moved in, bringing fresh perspectives. Old grudges faded as people found new things to worry about. And Eliza and Ethan became known not as the scandal couple, but as the family who'd survived everything and come out stronger. Mrs. Carmichael, improbably, became something like a friend. She'd stop by occasionally with fabric for dresses or seeds for the garden, or just to talk. She never explicitly apologized for everything she'd said and done. Her pride wouldn't allow it, but her actions spoke louder than words ever could. She brought Hope toys on her birthday, offered advice when Eliza was struggling with a difficult decision, even helped out when Ethan broke his leg, bringing meals and checking on the animals. Gerald Dawson left town a few years after the wedding. Eliza heard through Sarah that he'd moved east, started a new business, married someone else. She hoped he'd found peace, hoped he'd learned whatever lesson life had been trying to teach him. She'd long since stopped being angry at him, because anger was a weight she didn't need to carry anymore. On Hope's 5th birthday, as they stood in the yard watching their daughter chase chickens and laugh with pure, unfiltered joy, Ethan said, "We did good." "Yeah," Eliza agreed, watching Hope's dark braids bounce as she ran. "We did. You ever regret it? Any of it?" Eliza looked at him, this man who'd taken a chance on a stranger at a gate, who'd stood beside her through every storm, not for a second. And she meant it, because this life, imperfect and unpredictable and sometimes brutally hard, was hers. She'd chosen it, and it had chosen her back. That night, after Hope was asleep and the chores were done, Eliza stood on the porch alone, looking out at the land they'd worked so hard to keep, the land that had tested them and shaped them and made them into the people they'd become. The moon was full, casting silver light across the fields, and the air was warm with the promise of summer. She thought about the girl she'd been, standing at that gate, alone, afraid, certain that her life was over before it had really begun. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, capable, loved. It hadn't been a straight path. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, every single second. Ethan came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. Nothing. How far we've come." "We've come pretty far." "Yeah, we have." They stood there together, looking out at the life they'd built, and Eliza felt something she'd spent years searching for: belonging. Not because someone had given it to her, not because she'd earned it through perfection or sacrifice, but because she'd fought for it, claimed it, refused to let anyone take it away. And in the end, that was the only kind of belonging that mattered, the kind you built yourself, with your own 2 hands, and with someone willing to build beside you. As the night deepened and the stars came out, Eliza turned in Ethan's arms and kissed him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me, when no one else did." Ethan smiled, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you for staying, when you could have run." "Where would I have gone?" "Anywhere." "But you stayed here, because here is home." "Yeah," Ethan said softly, "it is." They went inside, closed the door against the night, and in the small, warm house they'd built together, they made their plans for tomorrow. For the garden they'd expand, for the fence they'd mend, for the life they'd continue building, one day at a time. Because that was what you did when you'd survived. You kept going, you kept building, you kept choosing each other every single day. And you held tight to the truth that sometimes the best things in life came not from perfect beginnings, but from second chances. From gates you walked through even when you were afraid. From strangers who became family. From rejection that became redirection. From endings that became beginnings. That was Eliza's story. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real. And as she lay in bed that night, Ethan's arm around her, Hope sleeping soundly in the next room, Eliza closed her eyes and smiled. Because she'd found what she'd been looking for all along. Not someone to save her, but someone to stand beside her while she saved herself. And together, they'd built a life worth living, a life worth fighting for, a life worth everything it had cost them. She thought about all the women out there standing at their own gates, facing their own rejections, wondering if they'd ever find a place to belong. And she wished she could tell them, it gets better. Not easier, necessarily. Not perfect, but better. She wished she could tell them that rejection isn't a judgment of your worth. It's just one person's opinion, one closed door, one path that wasn't meant for you. She wished she could tell them that the strength to rebuild comes from within, that you don't need someone to rescue you. You need someone willing to hand you tools and work beside you while you rescue yourself. She wished she could tell them that home isn't something you find. It's something you build. Brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find someone willing to build it with you. That was the real story. Not about a woman who was saved, but about a woman who saved herself and found a partner in the process. And that, Eliza knew, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. As sleep finally claimed her, Eliza's last thought was of hope, of the world she'd grow up in, of the lessons she'd learned not from lectures, but from watching her parents work side by side, struggle side by side, build side by side. Hope would grow up knowing that women could be strong. That rejection didn't define you. That hard work mattered. That choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. She'd grow up knowing that love wasn't about being completed by someone else. It was about two complete people choosing to build something together. And maybe, just maybe, she'd never have to stand at a gate, alone and afraid, wondering if she was enough. Because she'd already know the answer. She was. She always had been. And so was Eliza. So was every woman who'd ever been rejected, dismissed, underestimated. They were enough. They'd always been enough. And sometimes, it just took the right person and the right moment to help them see it. That was what Ethan had done for Eliza. Not saved her, but seen her. Really, truly seen her. And that had made all the difference.